this podcast that we're going to do today is a long time coming, and a topic that I've talked about since we started the SOMM TV podcast with producers. And it was like, how do we get the right guest to talk about a monolith of a figure? And the idea is to talk about Ernest Hemmingway and all of the things he is supposedly credited with inventing in the cocktail world.
So many things.
Amanda, as you know from that previous podcast listener, she owns a bar called Contiki, which is situated between two car dealerships in Glendale, which is in Los Angeles, and she is an expert and a fantastic bartender, and one of the real bartenders of Los Angeles. Not one that's trying to be an actor, but like a real bartender and a historian of all of this stuff. You were it. We've been waiting for you, Amanda.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Well, self-proclaimed historian. I do like to research everything that I do because it's fun and interesting.
It is. So Hemmingway, this could be a 10-part series on PBS to talk about Hemmingway, his life, all of these things.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I'm going to name a few things that come to mind for me for Hemmingway. You know, I think he was known as a guy who could outdrink anyone, outsmoke anyone, out-adventure anyone. He drove an ambulance in the Spanish Civil War. He has a breed of cat credited to him in Key West that has an extra, these mitten paws, these cats, which are adorably cute from the deformity. And they're so cute. He loved cats, but there's a great story with that. He's credited with inventing not just cocktails, but a lot of food you sometimes hear about for him. And then I haven't even talked about the fact that he's one of America's most celebrated novelists and curmudgeons. What do you think of when you think of Ernest Hemmingway?
Well, I think of this kind of enigma, truly. I mean, there are so many stories about him and there's so much folklore about him, and trying to piece everything together can be quite difficult at times. But I think of him as an adventurer. I think of him as sort of almost a true patriot. He had this zest for life and this zest for trying new things and this zest for travel and this passion for love. He was kind of a classic artist.
Meaning he was a great husband.
He was a fantastic husband.
Classic artist means I drink absinthe all day long and then throw books at the wall.
Or marry wealthy.
Or marry wealthy. That's a good policy.
Which he married, like 4 times?
Yeah, and I think the stories are all pretty epic as far as those wives' reactions to having been a part of those relationships are always very interesting, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to, if I could sit down with anybody from the past, I would love to sit down with all of Hemingway's wives and all of his mistresses.
I mean, you'd have to fill like Candlestick Park in San Francisco or something like that. But yeah, that could be very interesting. Well, if you're listening to this podcast, we have started recording only select ones of these for video on SOMM TV, and this is one of them. And we can see you're drinking something. What are you drinking?
Well, I am drinking a pretty classic Hemingway daiquiri, also known as the Papa Dobel. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this already know it was apparently discovered or made for Hemingway at the Floridita bar. We'll
get into all this.
Yeah,
sure.
We'll get
this is coming.
I decided that I needed to revisit this classic sort of Hemingway, the cocktail that he's known for the most.
Yeah. Well, like Hemingway, you're having it at lunchtime, and I'm proud of you.
Exactly.
I'm sadly didn't have the right ingredients, so I'm just drinking a glass of wine.
Perks of owning a bar.
That's right. The perks of owning a bar. Yeah, I chose the wrong profession. All right. So when we think of Hemingway, what's your relationship? Because we have to talk about him as an author. We have to. So let's just start with, what's your relationship with him? Is it when I say his name and you think of him as this larger than life character and all of the good and bad that accompanies that, do you think of him as an author or do you think of him as an adventurer? I mean, what's your relationship to him as a writer?
I do think of him as an author. He was required reading in school when I was in school anyways. And he, won the Nobel Prize, right? Mm-hmm. And he had this it's known as like the iceberg style of writing, where he knew, he believed in what was underneath the water, right? The big vast part of an iceberg that's under the water, not just what's exposed. And So I think he was kind of a literary genius, and he also just brought so much of his own personal life to his stories. So sometimes you could actually, think of these stories as true, like he actually lived through them, and you can actually visualize his life and his friends and all of these experiences that he had.
Well, it is an interesting thing to think that way. And we will get to the cocktails because there's a tremendous amount of possible bullshit, which you and we're going to litigate which cocktails he actually deserves credit for creating. Because, if you go to certain bars, you're like, oh, Hemingway created this salad here. And you're like, okay, I've been in French Polynesia and Hemingway supposedly created this drink. And I've been in so many. In Bora Bora, there's a bar that famously says Hemingway created this drink. And
Hmm.
I've been places where they claim he invented the Bloody Mary. And I'm like, Hemingway could not have done all these. We're going to get into all that. But I do want to say in his books, his main characters always have a drink they love,
Yep.
whether it's rum or whiskey or a cocktail. In some cases, it's grappa. It's always this thing that they drink. And it is important to say, no matter how much bullshit we get into, this man was no bullshit. For whom the bell tolls about the Spanish Civil War,
Hmm.
Ernest Hemingway almost died as an
Right.
ambulance driver, and he wasn't, this guy walked the walk in a way that they just don't make him like this anymore. And, and we should say too, that the world he inhabited is gone. It does not exist
Absolutely.
anymore.
No, I was
Gone.
thinking that a lot in just, refreshing myself. Yeah, that world, this very romantic, adventurous sort of pirate world that he lived, it doesn't really exist anymore. it's
I mean,
it's
I would say that world, though, for all of its nostalgia, probably wasn't the best environment to be a woman. Probably wasn't the best
no.
environment to be a somebody of color. Probably, I mean, we're talking about there are pluses and minuses in that situation, but it's very easy to look back and go, Cuba before the revolution must have been amazing, and
Oh,
yet
yeah.
I bet there were some issues.
Oh,
You
for
know,
sure. I.
so I don't know. I don't mean to be that guy, but it's definitely easy to romanticize Paris in the
For sure.
20s,
Didn't
and yet,
Gertrude Stein put him in his place a little bit about some of his
oh yeah.
the ways that the stories he told about women, or ways he depicted certain scenes with women in his novels? I think I can't remember her exact quote. Maybe you can.
Isn't that a scene in Midnight in Paris? The Woody Allen happens to be canceled, but in the Woody Allen film, isn't that there's a scene where she confronts him in a bar?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah, she confronts him in a bar. I think that he is just the stuff of legend, and people have tried so hard to do movies, and it's just so hard to encompass this person who is. I kind of liken him like there's a few people like Teddy Roosevelt or some of these Renaissance painters or something where you have these like concept of a Renaissance man
Hmm.
or woman where there just is, but this particular person, I don't know if anybody after him has done this. And if they have, it was on screen. It wasn't in reality.
For
He did it
sure.
for real.
For sure.
So that's my big diatribe about him. Where do we start from a standpoint of his cocktails? Where do we even begin
Well,
to do this?
it's that's I think you just kind of, you can begin anywhere. You can start at the beginning of his literary works, or the beginning of his life working, when he was a reporter in Kansas City, right?
Mhm.
So, or you can begin with his
I want
first
to take this
love.
back. I just thought about something. I'm so sorry to cut you off, but I
No,
just thought
please.
he's kind of like the original Hunter S. Thompson.
Well, oh my, I'm so glad you said that, because I didn't want to say it without sounding silly, but I feel like he was the original Hunter S. Thompson minus the hardcore drugs.
Minus the drugs, but Hunter S. Thompson also would wake up and drink a pint of vodka. It's not like that wasn't
Exactly.
his MO.
Exactly.
And in putting yourself, I mean, he's the inventor of gonzo journalism. He just happened to write nonfiction.
Right.
And it's
Right.
interesting, you know?
I
Except
definitely drew that parallel myself.
Hunter S. Thompson never. We should do a Hunter S. Thompson alcohol one. That's one that will be not for the kids. But I would say, Hunter S. Thompson. This is a really quick like a dichotomy. Hunter S. Thompson never did something as sweet and heartbreaking as The Old Man and the Sea.
Sure.
Hunter S. Thompson does not have a breed of cat named after him in Key West with the extra mitten paw.
Absolutely.
So there is a difference, but they're not, maybe Hunter S. Thompson was the last of these people.
For sure. Well, Hemingway was a romantic. I mean, he really was. He, and he hung out with the Gatsbys and the Fitzgeralds and, in the era of romance.
Yeah.
So he had a passion and a sensitivity, which is also, to me, I don't want to shrink him, but at being a bartender, you're basically a glorified therapist. Him having so many wives and falling in love with so many different people at so many different aspects and times in his life. And then also kind of just wanting everybody to get along, with Pauline and Hadley, the first two wives. He was just like, hey, we can have a threesome. Right?
Yeah.
And then
I can't proclaim to know women, but I know some, and I just don't know if that's going to work out. But that's slippery. So do you want to start with him as a journalist, and we'll start with cocktails? I mean, the legends abound. Should we start with what we know he invented, what we know is credited to him, and then litigate some of the ones that probably are bullshit, to say the least? All right, why don't we start? So the drink you're drinking, that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. Okay. Hemingway Daiquiri, also known as the Papa Doble. It was named after him. The Floridita bar in Cuba is where he apparently walked in one day, and the bartender was blending something up, actually, with grapefruit, sugar, maraschino, and rum. And he walked up to the bar like he did in many bars and said, I want to try that. And the bartender served it to him, and he said, this is great, except take out the sugar and let's double the rum, and I'm going to drink it. And so honestly, that's sort of how it happened. So he gave his 411. He was like, let's not have any sugar. Let's double the rum and shake it up and pour it in my glass, and I'm good to go.
I heard I read, and this is all legend, I read that a member of his family was diabetic. And so he had a very adverse effect to sugar and didn't want it in things.
For sure.
Have you heard
I read that his dad or his uncle was a diabetic, but I know a lot of people say he was a diabetic, which I'm sure he did suffer from late diabetes just based on his lifestyle and, along with a lot of other health issues. But yes, I've read the same thing.
Well, he would probably, that idea of less sugar, more acid, the kind of stuff that people who are obviously wine drinkers or cocktail drinkers tend to lean towards, especially in today's kind of climate.
Absolutely.
He would probably fit in a bit in the tastes of what's happening today. Because when he was doing this, sugar was the rage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think he would have paroled in the 80s. I think he would have just totally gone against all the cocktails of the 80s. And then he would definitely lean in now to this mixology sort of cocktail world of playing with amaros and spirits and less sugar and letting the spirit shine through.
I can't see him in the Bartles and James commercial for the wine coolers. It just doesn't strike me as his vibe personally, but so okay, the Hemingway Daiquiri, that's easy.
Yeah.
What else can you put? And that's a Cuban thing, and Cuba at that time was a wild place, revolution in the air, really, really. And Cuba always had revolution in the air. Everybody thinks if your references, you've seen The Godfather too. I have news for you. Cuba was revolutionary way before that. They were fighting the Spanish forever, and then they were like, oh shit, now the Americans have moved in from a standpoint of money, and they were always trying to push us out. And so that must have been an electric time, in Cuba.
For sure.
What's another cocktail? What's another one you can put your self-worth on that he actually is credited for?
Well, so interestingly enough, and again, I do not know if this is true, but I read that the Bellini in Henry's bar in Paris
Yes,
is one
sir.
of the cocktails that he actually did invent, which seems wild to me. However, if you read about how that was made, it was fresh peaches, fresh peach puree, and prosecco or champagne. Would have been champagne in France, obviously, but he uh, he apparently invented that to help the owner cut back on his martini intake.
Oh my God. These are different times. I mean, I think now, it's like people wonder why the temperance movement happened. They're like, how could you want to outlaw alcohol? It's like, well, I don't know. People would wake up and drink a Folgers can worth of bourbon.
Yeah.
Maybe that's kind of why. I mean,
But you know what? You would too if you were there was no air conditioning
yeah,
and no like really pain relief.
no good toothpaste.
No
People's
good
teeth probably
toothpaste.
looked a certain way. I mean,
Exactly.
you got to have a few drinks before you're going to go in for a
Yeah.
kiss.
You kind of
You
had to
know?
keep it rolling every day, but I think uh, also Hemingway was noted for moderation in certain times, especially when he was writing. A lot of from my reading, what I gather is that yes, he drank a lot, but he also sort of knew when
This
to
is great.
not drink.
I love this. This is great. Don't stop.
So,
this is like Winston Churchill he was in moderation during war. He only
right,
drank 44 glasses of champagne. All
right.
right, keep going. I'm sorry, it's so
Um,
good.
he definitely wanted to, like I said, taste everything and experience everything, but he's kidded with other writers about their drinking while they're writing, saying, I could see it mid sentence when he's had a martini in the afternoon or whatnot. So he took his writing very seriously. And I think he really used spirits more medicinally. And then later on in his life, probably a little bit more just codependent. But I also think spirits were a time of celebrating. It's just like when you smell something or taste something. I'm sorry, that was my ice machine at the bar, that loud
You're
ka-thunk.
in a bar. It's good.
um, they take you back to a certain time. So I think he was a very nostalgic drinker. And he had a hankering for something that reminded him of Paris, or reminded him of one of his wives, or reminded him of Cuba, or reminded him of Key West. But I'm very sensitive to alcoholics and alcoholism. I feel like there are sometimes it gets a hard rap, when really I do feel like Hemingway was this just celebratory person of tastes and culture and experiences.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's an interesting perspective. There was the threshold for what that means. I mean, the concept of being an alcoholic in that age, and especially maybe 100 years even earlier, let's just say it was different than today. I mean,
For
today
sure.
is like, you know, I have to have my 2 glasses of wine every night. Do you have to? You might want to think about that. It's
Right.
like that would not be the question
Right.
then. So anyways, moderation is always a good thing, but I think the Bellini is the other one that it's surprising, but it seems that he really did
Yeah,
come up with this. It's not a
it
very
really does.
complicated cocktail.
No, not at all. But that's the thing with Hemingway. He was not a complicated cocktail guy. That was not his palate. No sugar, fresh juices, and a lot more spirit. That's sort of how he rolled. So the other cocktail, and I'm not sure that he invented it necessarily, but he was a big proponent of Death in the Afternoon, which is the champagne absinthe cocktail, which he
Yep.
discovered absinthe in Paris. You might know a little bit more of the history of that, but it was a very simple, easy cocktail that would set you right and that would take you on a journey and just made you right with life. And that was one of his that he loved to drink.
I think so there is this story that is very strangely like, look, a lot of this is legend. So for all of you who are going to tweet at me and all of this stuff, I know there's 5 versions of this, but the story that I love hearing, and I was told this story in Paris. We were filming SOMM 3, and after that film happened, we went down to the catacombs and did the whole thing, and or with all these skeletons. And so the guide who was down there taking a guide group through was doing his tour and then stopped for a moment, and we were just chatting with him about what it's like to be down in the catacombs around all these skulls. And he said that the catacombs, he just mentioned a bunch of like history to us, and he mentioned that Hemmingway loved to come down in the catacombs and think and sit down there and think. If you've never been in the Paris catacombs, the Paris catacombs
I have
are
not.
miles of bones and skulls, and that's a whole other topic. And it's an incredible, there's nothing like it. It's terrifying and beautiful and amazing, and the history is wild. But the reason I bring this up is Hemingway used to like to be down there, and there's a bar above. It's been there since the 1600s, and it is the catacomb. The restaurant has the skull on it and the whole thing. He used to go there, and the bar was famous for cats jumping up on the bar, and he would drink there, and there are cats all over, and he hated that cats were allowed to jump up on tables, jump up on bars, and supposedly he threw some huge fit in this restaurant and said he will never come back if there are cats. But he had been going to this place nearly daily while he was in Paris during this period of time. And supposedly he wrote in his journal that he began to miss cats because he was around them so much and had like a full turn on cats. And he's the one who wrote this document that says that cats are like the ghost of a house. They haunt the house, and the house becomes alive because you have cats. And that's what made him bring all these cats to his house in the Keys, where they bred. And his thing is, he wrote, they knock down my drinks. And I hate that. That their tails knock down their drinks. They don't have any manners. They're very rude. And then he said, I kind of miss cats knocking down my drinks. And it's this very interesting way you can watch a man like turn. And I just wanted to bring that up because like the Paris thing, you could have a whole podcast about him in Spain, him in Cuba, him in Paris, like you said, him in Kansas City. And so now is the time we get into the legendary what's bullshit and what's not cocktails for him. Because the cat thing, he wrote some of that, and the others, maybe, people are trying to get me to go to the restaurant above the catacombs in Paris or not. I don't know. Sure. But where do we start? Can we start with the Bloody Mary?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
Because I don't think he invented that, because there are too many, and I'm not going to remember where they were documented right now, but there are too many instances where this cocktail has been documented other places where those stories make a lot more sense than it makes for Hemingway to have said yes. But he notated it in his travels. Like he wrote about it in his travels. And if you can remember where he was at when he notated, I just can't remember specifically at the moment. But he wrote the recipe down in his journals about the tomato and the Worcestershire, I can't pronounce that word, sauce and all that stuff. He wrote it down, and then he made it for somebody. And I don't think he invented that drink. I think he imbibed on that drink and he really enjoyed it. And
it doesn't make sense, because I would feel like the idea of a tomato juice based thing with a spirit, I just can't believe that would have been invented that late. It doesn't make sense to me. That's too. Am I crazy in saying that like it just would logically make sense? It would have been done earlier.
No, I don't think you're crazy in saying that. I think it does logically make sense that it was made at an earlier time, and it's a recipe that was sort of handed down. It was probably invented in some, farmhouse with like I don't know, a tomato maybe fell into something, and somebody was like, "Oh, this tomato and alcohol is kind of interesting. Let's see what's happening with it." I don't know.
I think okay, so we can brush past the Bloody Mary. What cocktail would be something up for debate that Hemingway might have done?
So I know. So they don't say that he invented the Americano or the Negroni or anything. That's not really. So I guess that one's not. That one's not one.
I will say though, you go to certain bars and they do say the Negroni was invented by Hemingway.
It wasn't.
I think that's just but that is said. I mean, that is a narrative you hear, that the Negroni was invented by him. I mean, I have heard that.
No,
that is not something that is like.
If anything, he in one of his literary works, in an immovable feast, he was actually he kind of misquoted himself when he was speaking, and he confused the Americano with the Negroni, because I believe he said that the The Negroni was Campari and sweet vermouth and
Bitters.
soda.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, right.
And
Vermouth.
where actually the Negroni is, sweet vermouth, Campari, and gin. And that would have been, you wouldn't think for Hemingway to have left out something as like gin that he consumed all the time. So I don't feel like he invented either one of those drinks. I think that in fact, he's been quoted as saying that Campari tasted like a brass doorknob. So
Yeah, I think it
Campari,
might, but
yeah,
I don't know that that's a bad thing.
yeah, not at all. But it was something that he leaned into, and it was something that he developed a taste for. So that's one of them. Let's see what else.
Well, I mean, the mojito is the one. I don't know. Is
No
it too
way.
early?
No,
Well,
I just
I
felt like
mean,
that was a given.
people say that he invented this in Cuba. I mean, it's on the list.
I don't believe that. I really don't. I don't think. I mean, where
I
the
love the passion. I don't know if you're watching. If you're watching this on SOMM TV, Amanda is very passionate.
it does
She's
that
just
makes no sense. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. I am very passionate about this.
no, I love
I
this.
had
It's
no
good. You're not cutting me
idea.
off. No, it's good. It's
Um,
good.
he did not like a lot of syrup in his drinks. He didn't want overly sugary experiences. Absinthe and champagne was as sugary as this man got. Um, Mojitos would just it would have been boring to him. Tea punch, on the other hand, I think that he would have really gotten into because he really appreciated the rums out of Martinique. The only thing I think with tea punch is that he wouldn't have added the sugar either. He would have just had rum either on the rocks with maybe a little bit of fresh mint and a lime, or just rum and lime. I think the man would have just sipped on warm rum and been happy.
Yeah.
Mojitos don't make sense to me.
Yeah, I sort of agree. I think that the mojito thing, you can't have it without sugar, whether it's raw or cubed or whatever you're going to mash at the bottom. But like, I have seen it made with actual sugar cane, and you smash the sugar cane up,
Mhm.
but you still need sugar. So if he's an anti-sugar guy, good luck.
Yeah, I
All
don't
right,
think he ever drank the mojito. I really don't. I don't think it's something that he was into.
Okay, I have a really, really controversial one that I think you're going to shut down really quick.
Uh-oh.
Did he invent the gin and tonic?
No.
Well, it is literally on a list, many of them, that he either invented or popularized it. I mean, the gin and tonic is tied up in a lot of British colonialism and things like that. And so I think it's pretty hard. But he might have popularized it.
He
might have been the
popularized
person.
it.
Okay.
That's 100% true, because his preference was scotch and soda, or scotch and water. His preference was a highball from the beginning, from my reading. Not that I knew the guy. But
you were married to him, I think.
Yeah. Well, I probably could have been one of his wives.
Oh, God.
I don't know what that says about...
You have a soft spot for alcoholics, you said. So
I do.
So.
But... Oh, you knocked me off track here.
It's terrible. We're bad.
But
it's good.
Yes, I do think gin and tonic is something that's very colonial British. I think that gin was one of his favorite drinks. But also, his favorite drinks was what was available at the time, and when he was in Paris, brandy was available. He drank a lot of brandy. And then when gin was, very cheap to make and like reproduce, he drank a lot of gin. I think he appreciated gin. I think he loved a crisp, clean gin and tonic in the afternoon, especially when it was really hot. And if you're drinking early, gin and tonic is kind of nice because it cools you down. I also think that quinine has a lot of medicinal properties, even though, if you use too much of it, it can also be poisonous. So, there's a lot, there's a lot to prove that he drank a lot of gin and he imbibed in it, but inventing the cocktail, no. And is gin and tonic a cocktail?
I mean, I know people who make artisan tonic.
Artisan tonic, yes.
100%. I mean, first of all, tonic out of a gun. Like, I may have insulted parrot heads, but I'm willing to insult tonic out of a gun.
Same.
All right. I mean, that stuff is garbage. I can't. There's nothing worse than having everybody can get behind this, even the person who has to use a gun, that if you do not have vigorous carbonation in your tonic, and also if it's coming out of a syrup mixed with a sparkling water, look, guys, we can do better. I mean, whenever I see a little bottle that gets opened by an opener and put in my cocktail, there's a little of me that just says thank you, inside, because it's a shame to have
For sure.
bad tonic.
I will say, side note, the first thing I did when I came into this bar is I ripped out the soda machine, knowing full well that I was going to have to pay more to do, the fever trees and the like actual legit tonics and sodas. But I just refused to serve a cocktail. I even want Coke out of the can. I think
Oh,
canned
well,
Coke is better for cocktails. It's just tastes exponentially different, even though there's a lot of value in it. But I will say, tonic syrups. There's a bunch of companies that make small batch tonic syrups, and those are phenomenal.
so
And
it
you
can
can,
be done. It
yeah, you
can be
can
done.
do a lot. But I'm talking about curated small batch tonic syrups, not Uh, I won't name any names. Not just like your off the shelf
I
tonic
don't think
syrup.
Big Tonic Syrup is listening to this podcast. I think you're okay.
You never know.
Yeah, you never know. They're everywhere.
But
But
yeah, small batch tonics can be really fun because you can play with the different herbs and the different spices and the different uh
semi-poisonous things
yeah,
like
semi-poison.
quinine.
I tried to make my own tonic and I think it came out really good, and I drank a little bit of it and I didn't die, but I got really scared to serve it because I don't know.
You don't know how much quinine you put
I
in.
didn't. I left the quinine in there, the little quinine bark in there for quite a long time. And I was like, you know what? Until I have an appropriate way to really
You,
figure
you,
out how much is in there, that it's the appropriate percentage, I'm just going to leave that to my little
you're safe
experiment.
from malaria for a little bit. That's good.
Totally.
I don't know if that's actually been disproven or not, but I think that's what they used it for. I will tell you, just my last thought on a gin and tonic. I mean, I'll get in a stranger's car for a good gin and tonic. It's one of my favorite things in the world. I love
Nice.
it. It's if you're in a hot place like New Orleans or Key West, or
Hmm.
if you're lucky enough to find yourself on a boat somewhere tropical, man, there's almost nothing like getting a gin and tonic. So
I
for him to
agree.
love that makes complete sense.
For
And
sure.
plus, tonic can be sweet, but it's not, a sugar-based drink.
Yeah. I mean, there's a high amount of sugar in it, but there's not simple syrup in a gin and tonic.
No, for sure.
What's your
Well,
gin
let's
of
go.
choice
Oh, my gin of choice. Oh, geez.
for a gin and tonic?
Oh God, you put me on the spot here. I think the problem with gin too is like there's a gin at my home, and then there's a gin that I can just find out when we're out. And
Sure.
the problem is I find a lot of the sort of like better premium gins are pretty good. I mean, like
Hmm.
on the whole, we're in a good gin space right now.
For sure.
What is this? There's a Scottish gin that I love. Oh, I put on Twitter recently. Like,
Blue
I want people
whale?
to recommend. Yeah, that's
Blue
it.
whale?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, you're good. Dude,
Or
you are really
is
good.
it blue or yeah, it's blue whaler. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, you're really good. That's unbelievable. Yeah, that's and it's delicious. It's very herbal, but it's also
Yes.
not over the top in a way that's but I think we're in a good gin space. I know we're kind of off on a tangent here, but gin has gone in different levels, but I think as an artisanal cocktail or artisanal drink that doesn't necessarily age, we're in a very good place for people caring about it,
Of course,
We're
I
in
agree.
too good a place with vodka. I would like less vodkas. It's like, can we stop this shit with vodka? I love vodka's good, has a great place to exist, and it should. But I don't know if we need 55 vodkas on the bar shelf. I think we're kind of might be
I
overkill.
think
Am I
that
wrong?
I think that vodka, I think it's hard. I really think if you're somebody who's like, I'm going to start a new vodka or create a new vodka, unless it's got a gimmick behind it or something, I think you're in for a little bit of a rough road.
Yeah.
But I don't want to throw too much shade to vodka, where a few years ago I might have.
No, I don't. I'm not throwing shit. I'm just saying we don't
because-
need as many.
No, of course, but I would. There's only maybe 3 vodkas that I would drink, and that's changed over time. But yeah, there's just about 3, and that's all I need personally. I don't need to have any others. But
you can make a whole bar around bourbon. You can make a whole
For
bar
sure.
around gin. You can make a whole bar around tequila and mezcal and any of that stuff. If I went to a vodka bar, I would be like, it's okay. And you could do that. And you should. And I've been to like Russian and Polish themed places and they're wonderful. But I don't know that you need 500 vodkas. I'm sorry. I'm not, again, I'm going to get Twitter coming at me being like, but have you had this buffalo grass vodka from Poland? And I'm like, all right. Yes, I've had
Zubrowski
that.
is really,
I've
it's
had
really
it. No,
nice.
I
It's
knew,
really
I knew you were going to
nice.
know. I knew you were going to know the brand. I knew it. Okay.
Kind of dig it.
I know it's very good, but it also has a certain taste. It's not.
It does. Some would argue that it's not really vodka, but it is.
Some would argue would argue that it's not. And I'm not. Oh, anyways, Hemingway's tapping me on the shoulder, going, "I thought this was about me." All right.
Come on.
So let me name another cocktail, which I think you're going to shut down. What about the Cuba Libre? Which is rum and Coke, essentially.
Right. No, I know. I just don't think he would choose to drink Coke like that. I think that's the thing. I'm not sure that was something that he imbibed in. I don't, there's never anything in his writing that talks about like a dark soda or a soda with, cocaine in it, or like there's nothing, unless I just haven't discovered it yet. But there is nothing that you read that even says anything about that.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know. These are the ones that you hear bartenders throw out. I'm at the end of my list. I mean, obviously the highball people say, but that is a pretty simple drink that I cannot
Kinda
imagine
like
somebody else didn't try.
Yeah.
I mean, a highball is literally, you could accidentally mess up anything and be like, oops, I'm going to drink this anyway. And that would have happened before somebody invented it. It makes no sense.
For sure.
Are we at the end? Are there any other cocktails that you would name?
Let's see. I'm
the myth,
looking
the legend,
at my notes. The daiquiri.
Well, the daiquiri. I mean, the Hemingway daiquiri, which you've
but
mostly
the classic
about.
daiquiri.
Oh,
like some people say that he would have a classic daiquiri, and I don't really believe that either because of the sugar content in that. However, I could see him having, just like we talked about earlier, rum and lime juice.
Well, rum and lime juice, especially with a little bit of ice, is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, exactly. Shake up some rum and lime and put it in a glass, and boom, you got your daiquiri, just minus the sugar. Even though, in some of his writings, they do say that he's like, 2 tablespoons of sugar, but for like this rum drink, and I can't remember what the name of the rum drink was.
2 tablespoons of sugar is a fair amount of sugar.
Yeah, but it was like a whole bottle of rum with a whole bottle of cider and 2 tablespoons of sugar. So in comparison to that, there's not a lot of sugar in there.
That's not one cocktail by any stretch.
So, he might have said, put a little sugar cube in my daiquiri.
Well, this particular person, the myth and the legend, like it will never stop and it will always live on. I think that he would be, if he wasn't, as you say, like, a pirate and an adventurer and all of these things, he'd have been a hell of a bartender. He'd have had great stories, and he would have cared about everyone else's story.
Absolutely.
Clearly
Absolutely.
Was a good listener. Let's end this by your favorite novel that he wrote.
I'm a big fan of The Sun Also Rises.
Interesting.
And A Movable Feast. And I think The Movable Feast makes a lot of sense because it was all about Paris, and it was heavily about all the places he went and the drinks he had and the food that he ate and that. But The Sun Also Rises, for me, kind of explored a lot of emotions and a lot of sort of a juxtaposition between like love and manhood. And, so to me, that was almost I feel like that might've been something that was very sort of close to his heart and a little bit more raw for him. And that I won't say that was my favorite a long time ago, but now I find the theme in that a lot more interesting. And yours?
Well, I think there's not really been a person that has looked at masculinity from the perspective that he has.
Mhm.
Now it's very conscious. People look at masculinity in a very conscious manner. Where I feel like he's like dealing with his id, his like internal part of his self,
For
dealing with
sure.
how do we define masculinity? What does it mean? How do you be a man? What does it mean to be a man? And how is sexuality based in that idea? And he did things that were very, I think, at least if not new, regenerative to that topic.
For
And
sure.
so for me, when I was quite young, I was somebody read The Old Man and the Sea in class to us. It's a very simple
Oh,
story.
cool.
It's
Mhm.
not my pick, but it's
Mhm.
how I discovered him. And it was read to us in class by a very passionate teacher over the course of several days. And it'd be like at the end of the last 15 minutes of class, we were going to read this, and they would read it out loud. And I was I just liked the story, and I was so angry by the ending. The ending made me so mad. And I don't want to spoil, but if you haven't read that book, it's been out a while. I was just very upset about it. And so you remember that, the time when you're young and your neurons are firing and you just want to see everything is so new to you. And I'd never
Mhm.
heard of Hemingway. And so I was told about this book, For Whom the Bell Tolls. And if you know my movies, and especially one I have coming out, I love history, and military history is something that I'm very interested in. I read this book, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and it's a larger book. It was one of the biggest books I ever read at that time. And there's something weird about the way Hemingway writes. It's very simple. His sentences, any other writer would have made them 3 times as long. And he's known
Yes.
for this like very like, if it's not needed, it doesn't have to be there. But yet
Right.
you can dive off a diving board into his words and get deep. And when I read this, I didn't realize how deep the book was, but it was an easy read. I could comprehend what was happening.
Mhm.
It's not, it doesn't talk down to you. It's not like reading Moby Dick where you're like, what the hell is going on? I can't handle this. I'm 11. Like For Whom the Bell Tolls is a very heady subject. And it's a book that I've come back to several times in my life. And there's a lot of drinking that takes place in that book.
Oh,
The
yeah.
characters, they drink and they cope with life. They medicate with alcohol.
Mhm.
They also enjoy alcohol, but it's violent. It's about losing your best friend. It's about losing your, a lot of your innocence and things that are analogous to Spain. And it's a beautiful book. That's my pick. And I would definitely pair that probably with a sherry because I just think it
I
makes
like
more
it.
sense.
Mhm.
So that would be my choice, For Whom the Bell Tolls. I can't believe how rich a text it is and how deep a book it is, and how much it's influenced, movie wise and culture wise. And
Oh, for
you
sure.
know, this is the fun thing about alcohol is that you can't, even if you're drinking alone, you're not drinking alone. You're drinking with these stories, and so
Totally. Yeah.
that's for you as with a soft spot for alcoholics. That was my sign off.
Stories, demons, we've all
Demons,
got
oh god,
spirits.
drinking Dante's Inferno, just chugging rum. Anyways, I want to say thank you very much. Do a toast here to the man.
Cheers.
Um,
I feel like we just barely brushed on the topic now that I just feel like I'm warmed up now. And like there is this could be like a 10 episode
I know,
thing.
I
There's
know,
just so much to chat
and
about.
and we can structure it more next time to do something like this. But there are others, Hunter S. Thompson and Winston Churchill, and they may not be cocktails that are the story, but I will say, as great drinkers, this is a fun part of a series that needs to keep going. So, Amanda, I want to say thank you for being on the SOMM TV pod.
Thanks for
And
having me.
if you're ever shopping for a Nissan in Glendale and you need a drink while you're doing it, the best tiki bar that exists, well, really, that I know of, is right there in Los Angeles, Contiki.
Thank you. And
it's
apparently I make a pretty good Hemingway daiquiri. I don't hate it. It's good.
she's not biased. She just has had a lot of rum at noon. So
Yeah. No, it's really I'm just not a fan of maraschino, but it's
Yeah.
so subtle. It does its job
That's
here.
good.
Hemingway was brilliant.
Hemingway was brilliant. To Hemingway. Thanks for being on the pod, Amanda. I really
Thanks for having
appreciate
me.
it. Okay.